Hello, welcome to Gardener's World. It's not often that I need to get a ladder out to deadhead flowers in the Jewel Garden, but these cannas have grown so tall that I can't possibly reach them without a ladder. This is Canna Wyoming. It's grown in a pot, but that doesn't seem to have stopped it in any way. Mind you, I do half fill these pots with good garden compost because these are greedy, hungry plants, and you really can't overwater or overfeed them. And at this time of year, when it's really hot, we have to water them practically every day. But it's worth it because they're incredibly dramatic. But the flowers do finish and they don't die well. And also they will then develop into seed, which will inhibit the development of new flower buds. So it's important to deadhead these as much as any other plant. And instead of cutting them off with secateurs, and very often I say cut back to something, in the case of cannas, all you have to do is just pull the bud off like that and it comes away in your hand. It will break off very, very easily. So to keep that flowering going, and with any luck it will keep going for at least another month, keep deadheading, even if you need a ladder. Coming up in today's programme, we meet a keen gardener who has transformed her London houseboat into a floating paradise.
The boat is covered in plants, and it sometimes becomes a bit of a battle between human space and plant space.
In the final leg of Nick's South African adventure, he travels to the wonderful Drakensberg Mountains to discover Eucomis, the pineapple lily growing in the wild.
Well, it's been quite a climb, but it's been worth it to find this little beauty.
And I shall be telling you everything you need to know about taking successful cuttings. Come on. Look how dry this soil is. At this time of year, it is really hard to project forward to the spring garden at its best in February, March and early April. But now is the time to start thinking about it, because although at the moment it's at its lowest ebb, in fact, underneath the soil, a lot of these plants, and particularly the bulbs, are just stirring into growth. And they will start to appear, if it's a mild winter, around Christmas time and certainly January, February. Now, this spring garden was the very first bit of long meadow to be created. And I started by planting some hellebores, the Lenten rose, Helleborus orientalis. The colours were clear and dappled. There were yellows and pinks and deep purples. But as they interbred, and oriental hybrids do interbreed terribly easily, seedlings would appear, and instead of replicating the best of their parents, almost invariably, they replicate the worst. So if you get a lovely pink with a nice deep purple, the chances are you'll get a muddy brown. So what I've learnt to do is to add in just a few more really good colours to rejuvenate the colour scheme. Now I've got here 3 plants, and of course they're not flowering now. Now it doesn't matter when you plant a hellebore, in fact, or what colour it is. Particularly the oriental hybrids, which are very long-lived plants, you do need to give them a good start in life. So what I do is dig a bigger hole than the pot that it's in, a deeper one. I'm going to add a mixture of garden compost and leaf mould. And a good spade or so underneath the plant will help the drainage, the root structure will love it, and also feed it well. Other than that, just pop it in the hole. And you can see very typical hellebore roots. I'm just going to tease them a little bit. But I like to do this because break the roots and that stimulates regrowth. Pop it in the hole. can then backfill with the soil. Now, of course, the other thing which I must do is give it a really good drink. Right, that should be fine. We'll start flowering next February, and hopefully for lots and lots of Februaries after that. Now, we went to visit a garden in London where the lack of any soil or seemingly space to garden in has not proved a problem at all.
I think of my garden as a bit of floating wilderness, and it's teaching me all the time about the natural world in so many different ways. My name's Poppy Okocha, and I live here on our boat with my boyfriend and our three-legged cat in central London on the Grand Union Canal, and we've lived here for about 4 years now. Being on the water itself just makes you feel so connected to nature and the seasons. So for us, the boat is really a kind of floating oasis, and along with the plants and all the insects that it attracts, it really feels like we're kind of like a little wildlife pontoon. This is where I grow a lot of plants. I grow plants inside the boat, on the roof, and on the deck where I am now. On the deck, I predominantly grow herbs and flowers, just because it's lovely to be able to access them quickly from the kitchen, which is just through here. On the boat, I have to be really aware of the fact that on the roof especially, there's a bit of a wind situation. As well as the wind, I also have the willows to contend with, which unfortunately cast so much shade. We actually coppice them every 2 years, but this year is a no coppice year, and so we're operating in quite deep shade towards the north side of the boat. So I have to kind of stack everything up facing south out of the reach of the willow shade. When I first came to London, I started a career as a model, and I was incredibly busy doing a lot of travelling, and in the end I got quite exhausted and burnt out, both mentally and physically, and that's really what kind of led me into seeking a more grounded lifestyle. Plants became a way of healing because it's just so calming and grounding and really slows you down, because you kind of tune into this slower, seasonal pace that plants seem to exist in. The boat is covered in plants, and it sometimes becomes a bit of a battle between human space and plant space. At the moment, unfortunately, I think the humans are only just winning. I really like to explore plants that have uses, because of course it's lovely for them to be beautiful, but when you're limited for space like I am, it's lovely to really kind of get a yield from everything. I grow ginger. Now, these are some ginger plants that I propagated this year. I purchase organic ginger root from the supermarket and soak it in water till it hydrates. They usually then sprout these little green bits that they're, telling me they're ready to go. And I put them in some nice moist, rich compost, and it can take a while. I mean, this guy has been really slow to the party. It took about 4 weeks for these to come up, and then this guy 8 to 10 weeks even. But I find it a really rewarding propagation process, because I use ginger in my cooking all the time, and it's really lovely to see what the plant actually looks like in real life rather than only ever interacting with the root. And actually, you can eat the stems and the leaves of these plants, and they're really delicious. I also grow this hardy ginger plant. It's called Zingiber, and she's a tough ginger plant. She can stay out in the winter in the UK. She originates in China, I believe, which is why she can handle such cold temperatures. So these guys are close relatives, except for this one likes to stay indoors in the warm. I think that's probably like me. And this one likes to be out in the cold. I love plants because I feel that when you really start to connect with them, you develop this kind of symbiotic relationship. So you're caring for the plants, and in return, the plant cares for you. The plants on our boat I don't grow necessarily to sustain us. Growing to meet self-sufficiency I don't think would necessarily be possible on a boat, but I do like to explore a connection to try and understand where food comes from, and just experiencing plants through their different life stages. And that just brings you one step closer to understanding the plants and understanding where our food comes from. And for me, that's just like a really magic experience. Now these are my amaranth babies. Amaranth is a bit of an experiment for me. I've never actually grown amaranth before. They grow quite big, so I'll offer some like nice structure and privacy across there. And the leaves, eventually, I'll be harvesting much like spinach or chard and using very similarly to spinach or chard. The plant eventually gives like really beautiful little flower heads which kind of cascade a bit. They're sort of fluffy, tiny little flowers. And those work really well as cut flowers. The flowers, if you let them be, will eventually turn to seed, which can be used as a kind of quinoa alternative. So this is a very versatile plant. I'm really excited for it to grow big and strong. But like I say, it's a bit of an experiment, so we'll see what they decide to do. Living on the boat has made me very aware of the resources we use, and so for me it's really important to integrate sustainable growing practices into the growing process, because if I'm working with nature, working with plants, then I want to be doing the best by nature and by the plants. I absolutely love tomatoes, and I have this dream of being able to grow enough tomatoes to be able to jar them up for winter months. So on the roof I'm growing 3 varieties. I'm growing Mini Belle, Gardener's Delight, and a beefsteak tomato called Marmande. With my tomatoes, I grow a lot of companion plants to support their growth and to repel pests and disease, as well as to attract pollinators. So the plants I grow are borage, nasturtiums and basil. And some of them even enhance the flavour of the tomatoes. They're all also edible as well as being beautiful, so they're doubly useful in a small space. There's a little bumblebee in the flower. These are my Gardener's Delight tomatoes, and they're cordon variety, so they're going to need a bit of support, which I'm going to give them from some stakes cut from the willows. And I love that these stakes come from literally just here. They're not imported, they're just such local material, and it's obviously free. So that's a fantastic use from the willow trees. They're not all bad. And then I'm just going to pop my tomato up against the arch, like so. And that will provide a nice bit of support through the rest of the growing season. The last few years I've spent on this boat have really been the beginning of my journey with plants, which is funny because I haven't had land to work. It's brought to me the understanding that plants can survive in so many situations, including on a boat, and it's always possible to grow a garden no matter where you are. And this garden is a dream. I'm really lucky to have it.
I've really enjoyed seeing gardens this year from all sorts of unlikely places. We've seen houseplants creating a garden in a flat, and there's a garden on a boat, just showing that if you want a garden, you can make it wherever you are, and it can be absolutely beautiful. These are classic runner beans, Scarlet Emperor, been grown for years, and you can see that they are really loving it here. Doesn't matter that it's hot and dry. I did actually water them quite a lot when they were younger, which is good. because these are plants that like plenty of water, but they can cope with the heat, they can cope with rain. They are really trustworthy and hardy and absolutely delicious. It's important not to let these get too long. 6 to 12 inches long is plenty big enough, and then they will be tender and tasty and fresh. And if you pick them over every few days, at least once a week, that will encourage them to produce new beans and keep going, if the weather isn't too harsh, well into autumn. These are one of the hardiest, most reliable of all the late summer tender plants. Now, it's time to visit one of your gardens. Susan Logie has sent us this film of her garden, which is brand new, attached to her new build house. But the garden uses a very traditional style.
Hello and welcome to Northumberland in the Coquet Valley, where I'm here in my new build house. I've been here for about 16 months. I've always liked the idea of a cottage garden, and the challenge was to see whether that would work in a new build property. Started off by putting a path in. To get rid of the stark straight lines, I've made 2 S-shaped paths of brick, and then I put in the trees, small trees. Got a crab apple here, and down in the corner I've got a hawthorn. This back border, I was trying to create the impression that the garden was blending in with the view. So I've tried to keep this pale colours and mainly whites to camouflage the fence. In the beginning, it's so tempting just to buy lots of plants and get them in the ground. But there again, I think you have to see the plant when it's in its place and growing, and I have made some mistakes, and I'll be digging some up and changing their position. There you have it. See what happens in another year. Maybe a pond, a small one.
Well, I hope Susan does make a pond, because A, they're very beautiful, and B, for wildlife, nothing is better. But a close second is long grass, and believe it or not, this parched, scalped bank, essentially it's a wildflower meadow. And with all wildflower meadows, they need to be cut in midsummer, the grass taken away, and scalped. Really get back to the bone of the ground. So, having raked it off, we now pull in the secret weapon, and that is this. This is a bag of yellow rattle seed. They're known as the meadow maker because yellow rattle is semi-parasitic on grass, and where yellow rattle grows well, grass grows less well. And that, in turn, means that other much more delicate flowering plants get a chance. And they can grow and prosper and flower and set seed without being swamped by grass. So you sow them now, they do absolutely nothing, they just lie on the ground, but that will lead to them germinating next spring. So, having created bare soil, because yellow rattle seed, in order to germinate, must be in contact with bare soil, you just sprinkle it over. Now, there is no virtue in putting this on too thickly. When you buy it, it will tell you the rates at which to sow it, because it's an annual, it will produce fresh seed every year. So the idea is that it seeds itself. Once you've done it once, you should never need to sow it again. Now, that's phase 1. The next stage is to add wildflowers. Now, you can buy wildflower seed mixes, but it will take a few years to establish. But on a small level in a garden, you can shortcut it by using wildflower plugs. And I've got some here. And the beauty of a plug is that when you put it in, you can see where it is. It almost certainly will flower the next year, and you've moved the process on by a couple of years. And the mix is absolutely lovely. We've got the field geranium, Geranium pratense. We've got a red clover here. There's bird's foot trefoil, knapweed. When you're planting on a bank, always put the majority of plants at the top, because the seed, of course, goes downhill. If you put the majority at the bottom, then that is going to remain getting thicker and denser, and it spreads uphill much more slowly. So I'm just loosening it up and popping them in so that they are the same depth as they are in the plug. And it doesn't matter if I disturb the yellow rattle seeds. It's just easier to put the rattle in first rather than try and sow around the plugs. And I'm not looking at what I'm planting. That's the point. It's completely a random mix because the selection has been careful in the first place. Now, I did water these plugs last night, but when you finish planting, absolutely drench them, particularly at this time of year when the ground can be so very dry. And if you choose wisely, if you choose the plants that are best adapted for the particular conditions you're growing them in, then they will look after themselves. Now, this is practical on a small scale in a garden and a really good idea. But on a bigger scale, the whole thing is much more ambitious. And Coronation Meadows, for example, which was started in 2012 to celebrate the Jubilee, are meant to be a large seed bank to create lovely wildflower meadows with local seed right across the country. There was a problem in that, though, because Lincolnshire didn't have a wildflower meadow that was suitable. However, Harry Turner decided, well, if they didn't have one, he'd make one.
It's an area of outstanding natural beauty. I know that's a fairly well-used phrase, but it really is a little bit something out of the ordinary. There's acres and acres and acres, but there wouldn't be if I hadn't sown the seed and planted the plants. My name is Harry Turner, and I live in Louth in Lincolnshire. I'm 87 and a bit. The wildflower meadow, it's a meadow now, but it was an arable field. There's 60 acres of it, and it's been growing barley and wheat for, I would think, at least 60 years. I had been thinking about this for many years, about wildflowers. There's lots of people in Lincolnshire is used to seeing all these wildflowers. They realised they was disappearing, and they was disappearing fast. Well, my involvement goes back for about 18 years, I reckon. The Wildlife Trust had bought this meadow, getting on for 60 acres. But then, well, we've got it, but what are we going to do with it? Somebody out the group says, we haven't got any flower-rich chalk downland. There's a chap here volunteering. He said he reckons he can have a go, and really this is the result. Yeah, flower-rich chalk down. Just those 4 words, and that's the 4 words I have kept in my mind for the last 18 years. I made a fairly big mistake for a start. I thought, well, cowslips, I'd have to grow them in pots. 125, I think. 3 years later, the cowslips had grown, made nice little plants. So I took them up to Red Hill and planted them, and well, thought, well done, boy, that looks great. But when next day to admire these flowers, the rabbits had dug the lot up. The rabbits, they dug the lot all, and I put them in a row, which I should never have done anyway. There's a mistakes you make when you start taking job on like this, aren't there, really? Now, I sow everything from seed, and I try to aim for about 4 acres per year, and I have been doing that for a number of years now. Well, this is how I planted many of the ones you see now in full flower. Do like all good gardeners do, make it fit. There we are, look. Looks as if it's been growing for years, doesn't it? And Mr. Rabbit can come and dig it out if he wants. It's a challenge, I know, but it's not hard work. It's something you like doing. One of the main reasons I started doing it, the insects, especially the butterflies up on the walls here, was getting less and less, and they rely on the wildflowers. Well, I stand in amazement, really, to just look at these wildflowers. And it's not just these, because when these die down, they'll go to seed. The plants you see as green, lovely green clumps like that, they will then come on, they'll put on their show. So we shall keep going on. I'm hoping to go on for another, I said I would go until I was 90, so I think I can whack it till I'm 90, so I hope so anyway. I feel pleased to be the man who started the Lincolnshire Coronation Meadow, and I hope somebody in the next few years will feel the same as I did all those 18 years ago and say, that's something we'll want to keep going.
Well, I hope that when I'm Harry's age, I will be as actively involved as he is with creating something as beautiful as that. These are squashes that I planted in June. This is a blue Hubbard, so a fairly long fruit, tinged with greyish blue, very beautiful and lovely orange flesh. They're very happy growing up a support as long as it's strong enough to take the weight of the plant, and we hope a few decent-sized pumpkins and squashes as well. And the reason I grow them up a support like this is to give them as much sun as possible in as little space as possible. So I'm just going to tie one more bit in here and then give them a good water. And if it's dry at all, and by that I mean if it doesn't rain for a few days, squashes are one of those plants that really repay watering. So they come at the front of the queue when it comes to water rations. I put in lots of compost into the ground, and there's no question about it that plenty of organic matter in the soil is the best way of both retaining water and improving draining. Now, still to come on today's programme, we have another chance to meet a gardener who has perfected the art of growing pineapples in Preston. But first, we've got another one of your films. And we were sent this by Simon Farmer from his garden in East Sussex.
Hi, welcome to my garden. I thought you might be interested to see my green roof. This is a building that I built 6 years ago now, and when I designed it, I knew that it was going to have a flat roof. So rather than just cover it in felt or fiberglass or something, I thought it would be much more interesting to fit a green roof. So up here on the roof, I've got a mixture of wildflowers, herbs, some grasses and some sedums. It tends to vary a little bit each year really, depending on the conditions. This year, the plants that have done really well include this spike speedwell, this purple flower in front of me, which is really popular with bees. Another one that's popular with the bees is this wild marjoram. It's got a lovely aromatic scent, which I wish you could smell. In the background, the yellow flower, that's the lady's bedstraw. I think that gets its name from medieval times when it used to be used to stuff mattresses. The plants that tend to do well are drought-tolerant ones because there's only 4 inches of substrate on the roof, and though I will tend to water it if we go for a really dry spell, it generally takes care of itself, which is one of the beauties of having a green roof. They're very low maintenance. The only thing you really have to do each year is to cut it down and rake it all off at the end of the season so it doesn't get a chance to rot down and enrich the soil too much.
I think Simon's roof looked absolutely great. I mean, what in effect he was doing is making a wildflower meadow on a roof, and it works. It just shows you that you can do almost anything if you just give it a go. Now, these are eucomis. And in fact, this small pot here, I planted the bulbs on the 1st of May. You can see that they've grown and are flowering really well. This is eucomis bicolour with this spotted stem, and then each of these little flowers are rimmed with this burgundy purple colour. And this pale version, this lovely clear light green, is pallidiflora. They are completely happy here as long as you keep them well watered in summer, and then in winter they're protected from frost and allowed to go bone dry. But I have never seen them growing in the wild. I'd love to. But Nick has, when he paid a trip to South Africa.
South Africa's rich and varied landscape is home to some of the most popular plants in our gardens, from the bold flamboyance of the Nephofia, the red-hot poker, to the delicate beauty of the pelargonium. These striking plants have become some of our best-loved flowers. But I'm here in the spectacular Drakensberg mountain range to see if I can find another South African horticultural hero, the eucomis, or pineapple lily. Part of the Hyacinthaceae family, the name eucomis is derived from the Greek for beautiful hair, referring to the distinctive crown of leafy bracts that's so reminiscent of a pineapple. There are only 12 species in the genus, 11 of which are native to South Africa. They grow in areas that get a lot of rainfall over the summer, often at high altitude. Wow, this is what I've been looking for. This is Eucomis autumnalis, absolutely thriving in its native habitat on the mountainside here in the Drakensberg. Now, its name, autumnalis, refers to it being autumn flowering. So it starts the season with this mass of lush, almost tropical-looking foliage. Then the spire comes up and you get this wonderful pineapple structure. What makes it really dynamic is by the end of summer and going into autumn, the flowers are just turning over into these beautiful seed capsules, which take on burgundy, brown, and red tones. So it's a long-season plant and really worth growing at home. Unlike several of the other eucomis, which have that sort of carrion or rotting meat smell, this actually has quite a nice, sweet, spicy smell. Here on the mountainside, it's squatted itself down to hide from the wind. In the UK, it pushes up much taller. But this environment tells us so much about how it wants to grow. It needs good moisture at the root and to support the bulb, and then lots of sunlight at the top to get it really growing. So all in all, it's a fantastic garden plant. You know, every corner you turn in this horticultural haven reveals some extraordinary new plant. Now, most of the euphorbias that we tend to grow in the UK are either shrubby or herbaceous. But believe it or not, this is a euphorbia. It's modified itself to cope with this extreme mountain environment. What an amazing plant. Well, it's been quite a climb. In fact, I'm at 2,500 metres, but it's been worth it to find this little beauty. This is Eucomis bicolour, growing wonderfully in its native habitat. Now, it's probably the most popular of the Eucomis that we grow in the UK, and you can see why. This coma on the top, this little toupee, has a lovely quality to it, and the rimmed edge. And then, looking at the flowers, each individual flower has this little purple marking round the sides, so it really defines them from one another. And then looking further down the plant, you can see all the way down the stem, you've got these purple specklings. And then going down to the foliage at the base, really lush tropical foliage. And again, there's that purple trimming around the edge, which gives it a very distinct look. Bicolour is autumn flowering, so it makes it a particularly useful garden plant. When everything's starting to get a bit sad, this pops up and shows its head. What's not quite so attractive is the smell. It's a carrion smell, so it's trying to replicate rotted meat because it's pollinated by flies. Now, in terms of growing it in the UK, plant the bulb on some gravel or some grit to help it drain away. And then in the winter, you can bring it indoors into a glass house or into a conservatory, let it dry down, and it'll be really happy and perform for you year after year. But there are two very different species of Eucomis that I'm keen to find. So I'm heading a few hours north to the high-altitude grasslands of the Steenkampsberg Plateau and the Baloran Valley Nature Reserve. Doug McMurtry is an expert on native South African plants and an old friend. You know, one of the things that brings me back to South Africa, Doug, time and again, is just the sheer range of plants that grow here.
We're very lucky to have such an amazing flora, Nick, it truly is. And here today we've brought you to see a very special Eucomis, because it's the biggest of the species in South Africa. Eucomis pallidiflora, variety Paul Evansii. But this specimen, sadly, is not as tall as it could be.
Okay.
They really should reach 2.2 meters in a good year. But this year, because we had a bad January rainfall, they're a bit shorter.
I mean, ordinarily in the UK, this is probably the size it would grow to because it's that much drier. Because, I mean, we're in a virtual bog just here.
Yeah.
But, I mean, what a beautiful plant this is. A fantastic sort of chartreuse flowers. And then on top of that, of course, there's this coma, this little tuft on the top. Now, I understand that historically in Mpumalanga and KwaZulu-Natal, it was used as a medicine.
Yes, it's a very important medicine used by the tribes. It is used for lung and stomach complaints.
Well, I mean, it's actually really toxic,
They're
isn't it?
hugely toxic, apparently. So you've really got to know exactly the right dosage.
So it's not medicine we should be doing at home?
No, I wouldn't recommend it.
Before I leave, I'm eager to discover a highly elusive Eucomis. It only grows in one small area on the reserve, and it's so rare in the wild, we had to get special permission to film it. Without Doug's help, it would have been virtually impossible to find.
This is quite the most amazing of the genus, I think. Eucomis, as you know, are usually quite tall. And here is the miniature of the genus, Eucomis vandermeervri.
It's interesting because we're now in a completely different landscape, and I suppose this has evolved to that?
Unlike Paul Evansii, which grows in a swamp, this little fellow's had to adapt to drier conditions. But it's probably here because this is where its pollinator is. Whereas in the middle of a swamp, Paul Evansii has to push its flower spike 2 meters to be noticed.
Yeah.
And this little chap doesn't have to do that.
Now, I understand, Doug, that this particular species is under threat. Why is that?
It's probably because of its localized distribution. It's an endemic to this province, Mpumalanga. Doesn't occur anywhere else. And it covers only a fairly small area in square kilometers. And so just that limited distribution always makes a rare plant a little more rare, you know, because it cannot adapt to any other conditions.
It's been a real revelation seeing Eucomis both growing and adapting to suit so many different environments. Now, I think the key thing that I can take away from this is an attempt to try and replicate these sort of landscapes and these sort of soil conditions back in the UK so we can grow the best Eucomis possible.
I have been to the Drakensberg, but I didn't see the Eucomis. I wish I had. They looked amazing, but maybe that's a good reason to go back. I am collecting material to make cuttings. And now and for the next 4 weeks or so is the best time of year to take semi-ripe cuttings, particularly from shrubs and shrubby herbs like rosemary. Semi-ripe simply means that it is new growth, but the bottom half of it has got some maturity. It feels distinctly woody, whereas the top is still soft and bendy. What I'm looking for is nice, straight, upright growth, the top 4 to 6 inches from this year, and cutting it just at the point where it started to turn woody. And that, at this time of year, is really, really good material. Right, I've got some rosemary, but I want another one that is slightly less easy. This is lemon verbena. We've got material here that shows what you shouldn't take. For a start, it's got a flowering head, and you should always try and avoid that when you're looking for cutting material. So we will just cut that, take that there. Now, having chosen your cuttings, it is really important to go to the next stage as quickly as you can, because these plants are dying. Always into the polythene bag, even if it's only for a few minutes. And if it's a warm day, you haven't been able to do it first thing in the morning, I strongly suggest that you do this indoors in the cool. Now, to provide the perfect rooting material with a nice loose root run so moisture can be retained but not get too soggy, best of all is either perlite or vermiculite. These are minerals and then heated at a very high temperature and they expand enormously. They're completely inert. Perlite doesn't hold nearly so much water as vermiculite. So on the whole, perlite is preferred for things like cuttings and for potting up, and vermiculite for seed, but both work perfectly well. So on balance, your best mix is 50% of a coir or bark-based compost with the same amount of perlite or vermiculite. Mix it up. And what we now have from that is the perfect balance for a material that will hold moisture and yet drain really well and allow oxygen in so that the roots can develop. I'm going to use plastic pots because I like to recycle them as much as possible. So we will fill that nearly to the brim. Now we can prepare the cutting. I'm going to start with the verbena. So I'll just take one out at a time. And this is where you need a sharp knife, because I want to first of all remove some of the leaves. The only reason you remove leaves is either because it's going to be below the soil and you don't want them rotting, or because they will transpire and the cutting will lose more moisture. And it does need some leaves because as the roots grow, they will be fed from the foliage. So if we take that as our basis, we have what are called nodes. And nodes are the point at which leaves grow. And that is the best place for the plant to produce new roots. So what I now use the knife for is to cut just below a node like that. And then at this point, make a hole in your mixture and bury it as deep as it will go. Water them well and keep them watered, and don't let them dry out. Don't put them in blazing sunshine, but give them plenty of light. Keep the air misted, and you'll see new growth in about a month's time. And then they can be potted on. And the pleasure at seeing something like this create new plant material, it's a brilliant way to make plants for free. Now, a couple of years ago, we visited the home of Dorothy Eastham up in Lancashire. And she is somebody who makes thousands of new plants for free every year.
I've always enjoyed gardening ever since we were married. Keeps you happy and healthy, and it's not very good if it's pouring down and you've rain dripping off your raincoat into your wellies, but that's par for the course, isn't it? Goosney, it's just a small village just north of Preston in Lancashire. I've lived in this house and area for 46 years now, and now, like, when I'm so-called retired, I've got a big garden and plenty to do. I must grow best part of 4,000 or 5,000 dwarf marigolds every every year, different colours. So I buy 36 bags of compost at one go, 5 bags of bark, and I don't know how many packets of seeds. And I sow the seeds usually mid-March and then start pricking them out about April. Well, in total, it'd probably be about 8,000 plants this year. It takes a couple of weeks to get them all planted out, then you sit back and wait and hope everything works out all right. It's a heck of a lot cheaper buying a few packets of seeds. Right, this is my hot greenhouse where I grow the exotic plants, and these are the peppers I am growing, and this is this year's fruit. And the flowers are very pretty little things up at the top there. These are just grown from a pepper that I buy from the supermarket. Scoop a few seeds out into a pot, cover it with a polythene bag, put in the greenhouse, and after a couple of weeks they should start showing through till we end up with one plant in a 7 or 8 inch pot, and hopefully that's the one you'll get your peppers off. And as well as peppers, I also grow melons. I buy melons from the local supermarket in about March, enjoy the melons, take the seeds out and grow my own, and now I am getting my own melons. And what I'm also seem to be getting famous for now is, as you can see in the greenhouse, we have pineapple plants. And if you look over to this one, Goosner Granny has grown a Preston pineapple. Apart from one year when I missed, I've had at least one pineapple every year for the last 10 years. But I've never had as good a year as this year, but I think that's definitely down to the hot weather. And this is how I propagate them. Just an ordinary pineapple from the supermarket, and I cut the top off, enjoy the pineapple, and then I start just peeling these lower leaves off, and you have to do it till you expose about 1 inch of the stump. The first pineapple I ever grew, it was fashioned back in the 80s to grow pineapples as a house plant, which I did, and the pineapple lived in the bathroom for over 20 years, never did anything. Then suddenly, after 20 years, it grew a pineapple, and I'd say I've been hooked on growing pineapples ever since. So once you've peeled enough of these back, you'll notice there's little nodes where the root system will start developing from. Just get an ordinary jam jar, and I just use a bit of cardboard to support it. Put it in that, and then leave it on a kitchen windowsill for about 3 or 4 weeks till you get enough root growth. Then I plant it into about a 4 inch pot of good quality compost, leave it in the greenhouse, then come winter, take it into the house, then next May, take it back into the greenhouse, and hopefully, after about 4 years, you might even get a pineapple. I don't buy a pineapple now because if I do, I have to plant the top. And there's a limit to how many pineapple plants you can get in the bedroom in winter. Everybody knows that I'm very much into gardening. Give me a wheelbarrow, a bag of compost, some seeds, I'm happy. I'm not interested in your girly going to your spa days or anything. I just love getting my hands mucky, and that'll do me.
It's lovely to see Dorothy again. And that whole irresistible urge to propagate, you can see she just can't help herself. Well, I want to make more plants, but now is a really good time to be sowing salad crops for winter and even next spring. But not just any old seed. There are a whole load that actually grow very well in short days and colder weather. But this is one of the ones I like best because it looks so good. And this is purple Mitsuna. And for a winter salad, they're absolutely delicious. As the days are getting shorter, germination and growth of seedlings is slowing right down. So this is not something to put off. The sooner you can get this done, the better chance you have. Now, sprinkle them thinly. I want to give them as much room as possible on the seed tray. And I will just push them down very lightly so you get good contact between the seed and the compost. I'm just going to cover that over with a little bit more compost. Label it Purple Mitsuna. Pop that in there. Water it well. Put it somewhere warmish to germinate. It doesn't need actual heat, but it certainly doesn't want to be cold. At this time of year, they're going to germinate very quickly. Now, as well as the salad leaves, I like to have parsley all year round. And that does mean sowing at critical points. The beginning of the year, January, February, again around May, and then now. And the plants that you raise now will be quite small all winter. But as soon as the days begin to lengthen after Christmas, they start to grow away and you get a really nice crop of parsley in February, March and April. And always with parsley, do not be tempted to sow them in little clumps. To get the best quality parsley, you do need to raise each plant individually and then plant them out at least 6 inches apart. And they will make big, strong plants with lovely fresh leaves that you can cut and will regrow 2 or 3 times before they then start to want to go to seed. I will water them, and I would expect to see the Mitsuna appear in a couple of days and the parsley in about a week. And they'll be ready to prick out in about 10 days to 2 weeks' time, and then plant out in about 6 weeks. Now, it's time to make our final visit this week to one of your gardens. And we're going up to Scotland, to the garden of Irene Berry at Hawick.
Welcome to our slice of Japan in the Scottish borders. This used to be an uneven, stony and sloping courtyard, but we worked with the natural contours to create a natural landscape with hills and a stream and a lake, and to create a place where we can just relax and feel tranquil.
The concept of the garden is really a place where we will learn to be more mindful. So even when I do my gardening, I try to focus on my breathing and to be mindful of what I'm doing. There are all kinds of shades of green here, and I use the creeping thyme to be the ground cover where the moss will not grow. And we must have evergreens in the Japanese garden. This is a yew, and lots of Japanese aces, and the colors change with the seasons. And my favorite is that Crimson Queen, ruby red in the sunlight, especially. It just glows in the sunlight. But today, as in most days in Scotland, it is quite dark.
Too often, when we see the garden, it's always about work, but it's so much better to just sit, listen to the sound of the water, smell the air, and feel at peace.
I absolutely agree that we spend too much time concentrating on what we're doing and how we're doing it, and not enough of just being in the garden. But I'm digging a hole for a reason, because I have a plant that will be happy here, even though this bit of the spring garden is even drier than the one that I put the hellebore in. But this fellow will be quite happy. This is one of our 2 native irises, the stinking iris, Iris foetidissima. And it is one of the very few plants that seems to actually thrive in dry shade. You can see that the roots are going round and round, which means that they long to be free. So I'm going to chop that into 2. Now just chop down, don't worry too much about it. Pull that apart. I might use the spade here. There we go. So I have 2 plants. So we'll pop that in the hole there like that. Backfill. Now, it is important, although it's well adapted to dry shade, to give it a really good soak now. Give it a chance to get those roots growing out. And it will take dry shade in summer, and in winter, on this spot, almost certainly it will be flooded at least once, and it will cope with that as well. It's really adaptable, and I think very beautiful. Right, I've got more to plant, and while I'm doing that, here's some jobs for you this weekend. If you grow rhododendrons, azaleas or camellias in pots, it's not uncommon for the buds to fall off before they open in spring. And that is because the plants are too dry now. So give them a good soak using rainwater now and every week for the next 6 to 8 weeks. And this will ensure good flowering next spring. As summer fruiting raspberries are coming to an end, autumn fruiting ones are really coming into their own. But the plants can sprawl all over the place. So support them temporarily using canes and string, and this will tidy them up and make them much easier to pick. Mint is flowering like mad at the moment. So reduce half your supply right down to the ground and trim off the flowering heads of the other half. Give it a good soak. This will stimulate fresh growth from that which you pruned hard, but while you're waiting for it, you've still got some leaves to pick. This is Salvia dombia. It was given to me last year. And I grew it, but it didn't flower. Whereas this year, the flowers have started to appear, and it's been well worth the wait, because you have these magnificent, long, red tubes of petals emerging from a dark, sort of chocolatey calyx. In fact, it's said to be the largest salvia flower in cultivation. And the plant originates from high up in the mountains in Peru and Bolivia. And in the wild, it will reach 7 meters tall. Well, in cultivation, apparently, less than half that. But it's still a really statuesque salvia. It is tender, so in October, I'll dig it up, take it into the greenhouse, and then in spring, cut it right back, and it can start to regrow and be planted out after the last frost. But an absolutely fabulous plant. Well, that's it for today. I'll be back here at Longmeadow next week for a special programme, because we are celebrating those plant lovers who channel their passions with more enthusiasm than most of us do. And long may they continue to do that. And also, we're on at the later time of 9:30. So until then, bye-bye.